My daughter-in-law left her 8-year-old son at my farm and disappeared without a word. I didn't call the police. I didn't panic. I just stood there on my front porch, watching the dust settle behind her car as it vanished down the long gravel road that cut through my property like a scar. The morning sun had barely risen over the Texas fields, casting that soft golden light across the fences Daniel built with his own hands years ago. The kind of morning that used to feel peaceful. Not anymore. Ethan stood beside me, his small hand gripping the handle of a worn navy suitcase that looked too heavy for a child his size. He didn't cry. That was the first thing I noticed. Most children would have. Most children would have asked when their mother was coming back. Ethan just looked up at me and said, "Mom said you'd know what to do." I remember the way those words landed. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet enough to settle somewhere deep in my chest and stay there. I nodded even though I didn't understand yet. "Come inside," I told him. My voice sounded steady. It always does. Inside, the house smelled like fresh coffee and old wood, the same way it had for the past 32 years. I poured myself a second cup, even though I hadn't finished the first. Ethan dragged his suitcase across the hardwood floor, the wheels making a dull, uneven sound like they weren't meant for long travel. I noticed that too. Everything about that suitcase felt wrong. Too formal. Too deliberate. "You hungry?" I asked. He shook his head and sat at the kitchen table, feet not quite touching the floor. 8 years old. Too young to be dropped off like a package. Too quiet to be surprised by it. I took a slow sip of coffee and looked out the window toward the road. No dust. No car. No sign of Ashley coming back. She didn't forget something. She didn't change her mind. She left. And somehow I knew that before my mind had time to catch up with it. "Did your mom say when she'd be back?" I asked, keeping my voice light like this was just another weekend visit. Ethan shrugged. "She said I might stay here for a while." A while. I set my cup down carefully on the counter. Not because I was shocked, but because I didn't want my hands to show it. Ashley had never liked this place. Too quiet, she used to say. Too far from everything. But she asked about it. More than once. About the land. The house. The will. I didn't think much of it then. People ask questions when they're trying to understand a family. Or when they're trying to understand what they can take from it. I walked over to the suitcase and rested my hand on the handle. It was heavier than it should have been for a child's clothes and toys. Ethan watched me silent, waiting. "Did you pack this?" I asked. He shook his head. "Mom did." "Of course she did." I didn't open it. "Not yet. Some things don't need to be rushed. Some truths reveal themselves better when you give them space to breathe." I looked back out the window one more time. The road was empty. Completely empty. Then I turned around, picked up the suitcase and carried it into the living room. Whatever Ashley thought she was doing. She didn't just leave her son behind. She left him here. With me. And that was not a mistake. I waited until Ethan went upstairs before I touched the suitcase again. The house had settled into that quiet afternoon stillness, the kind that usually brought me comfort. Not today. Today, every sound felt sharper. The ticking clock on the wall. The hum of the refrigerator. The faint creak of the floorboards as Ethan moved around in the guest room that used to belong to my son. I stood in the living room for a long moment, staring at that navy suitcase like it might explain itself if I gave it enough time. Then I bent down, unzipped it slowly and lifted the lid. No toys. No stuffed animals. No crumpled t-shirts or sneakers tossed in carelessly like most children would pack. Everything inside was folded. Neat. Intentional. Rows of clothes organized by type, each piece chosen with care. That was the second thing that felt wrong. Ashley was not careful. She was fast, distracted, always moving on to the next thing. But this looked like someone had packed for a trip with no return date. I reached deeper into the suitcase and found a manila envelope tucked beneath the clothes. Thick. Sealed. My name was written across the front in Ashley's handwriting. Margaret Collins. She had taken her time writing it too. Each letter was clear, almost practiced. I did not open it right away. Instead, I sat down on the edge of the couch, holding it in my hands, feeling the weight of whatever she thought I needed to know. Outside, a breeze moved through the fields, bending the tall grass in slow waves. The fence posts cast long shadows now. Afternoon had already begun to slip into evening, and still, there was no sign of her. I turned the envelope over and ran my thumb along the edge. Whatever this was, it had been planned. That much was clear. Ashley did not leave things to chance. Not when it mattered. Not when there was something to gain. Upstairs, I heard Ethan's footsteps pause, then continue. No crying. No calling out. Just quiet movement like he was trying not to disturb anything. That bothered me more than if he had been upset. Children should not know how to disappear into a house that is not theirs. I finally opened the envelope. Inside were documents. Not one or two but several stacked carefully in order. The first was a copy of Ethan's birth certificate. The second, medical records. Immunizations. Insurance information. Everything a parent would hand over to someone who was about to take responsibility. Permanent responsibility. I felt my chest tighten not from panic but from something colder. Recognition. This was not temporary. This was not a favor. This was a transfer. I set the papers down on the coffee table and picked up the next document. A notarized letter. Signed by Ashley. Dated 3 days ago. I read it once. Then again. Each word settling deeper than the last. She had granted me temporary guardianship of Ethan. Temporary, she called it. But there was no return date. No condition. No explanation beyond a single line that stood out like it had been carved into the page. I trust you will do what is best for him. I leaned back slowly, the paper still in my hands. Trust. That was an interesting word, coming from someone who had just disappeared without a trace. I looked toward the staircase, listening to the soft movement above me. Ethan was here. Safe. Quiet. Waiting. And somewhere out there, his mother had already decided she was not coming back anytime soon. I did not reach for the phone. Not yet. There was no emergency to report. No immediate danger. Just a situation that had been carefully constructed and delivered right to my front door. I gathered the papers, stacked them neatly again, and placed them back into the envelope. Then I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out across the land that had been in this family longer than Ashley had been alive. She thought she had made a clean exit. Simple. Efficient. Final. But she had left something behind that connected her to this place in a way she could not just walk away from. And as I stood there watching the sun dip lower behind the fields, I realized something else. She did not just leave her son with me because she had no choice. She left him here because she believed I would handle it. Quietly. Properly. Without questions. She was wrong about one thing. I do not ignore questions. I just wait until I am ready to ask them. The next morning came early on a farm, whether you were ready for it or not. The sky was still a pale gray when I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee, the air cool and sharp against my skin. The fields stretched out the way they always had, steady and familiar, but something underneath that quiet had shifted. I could feel it the same way you feel a storm before it arrives, not in the wind but in the silence. I took a slow sip and looked toward the road again. Still empty. No car. No sign that yesterday had been anything but exactly what it was. Inside, I heard the soft creak of the stairs before I saw him. Ethan came down carefully, one hand sliding along the banister like he had already learned to move quietly in someone else's space. He paused at the bottom step when he saw me, as if he was waiting for permission to exist in the room. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice even. He nodded. "Morning." No questions. No mention of his mother. Just that same calm acceptance that did not belong to a child his age. I set a plate in front of him and cracked 2 eggs into the pan. The sound filled the kitchen in a way that felt almost normal. Almost. "Do you like scrambled or fried?" I asked. "Either is fine," he said. "Either is fine." I noticed how he said it. Not like a child choosing breakfast. Like someone who had learned not to have preferences that might inconvenience anyone. I cooked the eggs, added a slice of toast, and set everything down in front of him. He ate slowly, carefully, like he was measuring each bite. I watched him for a moment, then looked down at my own plate, though I had no appetite. "Your mom ever brought you out here before?" I asked. He shook his head. "No. She just talked about it." That made sense. Ashley talked about a lot of things she never followed through on. But she had asked about this place. About the acreage. About the house. about what would happen to it when I was gone. I had answered politely at the time. I always do. But I remember the way her eyes lingered, calculating, like she was not just asking out of curiosity. What did she say about it? I asked. Ethan swallowed his food before answering. She said it was safe. Safe. That word settled into the room heavier than anything else. I reached for my coffee and took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch just a little longer than comfortable. Safe from what? I did not ask him that. Not yet. Children tell you more when you give them space than when you press them for answers. After breakfast, I showed him the back porch, the barn, the long fence line that marked the edge of the property. He followed close but not too close, like he was trying to match my pace without assuming anything. When we reached the barn, I pushed the door open and let the familiar scent of hay and wood fill the space. You ever been around horses? I asked. He shook his head again. No, ma'am. Ma'am. Polite. Careful. Not a trace of complaint. I nodded and led him inside, letting him see the stalls, the tools, the small routines that made up life out here. He watched everything with quiet attention, but there was something else behind it. Not curiosity. Not excitement. Something closer to adjustment. Like he was already preparing himself to stay. That was when I noticed the small detail that did not belong. He was wearing the same clothes as yesterday. Clean. Neat. But the same. No overnight bag in his hands. No second set of shoes by the door. Just that suitcase upstairs. Packed by his mother. Planned. Final. I turned back toward the house, Ethan following a few steps behind me. The sun had climbed higher now, casting long lines of light across the dirt path. Another quiet morning on land that had seen decades of family, of promises, of things built and things lost. And now this. I stopped at the edge of the porch and looked out again, letting my eyes rest on the horizon. Ethan, I said, not turning around, when your mom left yesterday, did she say anything else? There was a pause behind me. A small one. Then, she said not to worry. That you would understand. I closed my eyes for just a second, letting that settle into place with everything else. Understand. That was the second time she had used that idea. That I would know what to do. That I would understand. I opened my eyes and looked out at the land again, steady and unmoving. I see, I said quietly. And this time I did. That afternoon, after Ethan settled into the small routine of the house as if he had been there longer than a day, I went back to the living room and pulled the envelope out again. I did not rush it. I never rush things that matter. The light had shifted by then, coming in through the west-facing windows, casting long shadows across the floor. I sat down in the same spot as before and spread the documents out carefully, one by one, like pieces of something that had already been decided long before I was brought into it. The birth certificate, the medical records, the guardianship letter. All clean, all official, all prepared with the kind of precision that does not happen overnight. Ashley had not been impulsive. She had been patient. That was the first mistake I made about her when Daniel married her. I thought she was scattered. Thought she was all surface and no structure. I remember the first time she came out here, standing on this very porch in a pair of shoes that were not meant for dirt roads, looking out across the land like she was trying to understand why anyone would choose this life. She smiled politely, asked the right questions, but her eyes never rested. Always moving. Always measuring. Later that same afternoon, she asked me how many acres the property covered. I told her. She asked if it had been paid off. I told her it had. She asked what I planned to do with it eventually. I told her the truth, that this land was not just property. It was history. It would stay in the family. She nodded at the time, but I remember now how quickly she changed the subject after that, like she had already gathered what she needed. I looked down at the papers again, tracing the edge of the notarized seal with my finger. This was not about leaving a child behind because she could not handle things. This was about placing him somewhere specific. Somewhere she had already decided was secure. I stood up and walked over to the small cabinet near the hallway, pulling open the drawer where I kept older documents, things I had not needed to touch in years. Inside were copies of the trust Daniel's father had set up before he passed. Legal structures. Protections. Things meant to ensure that this land, this house, everything tied to it, would remain under control, no matter what changed around it. I pulled out the folder and carried it back to the table, placing it beside Ashley's envelope. The connection did not feel accidental. Not anymore. Upstairs, I could hear Ethan moving again, quieter now, like he was learning the rhythm of the house. Adjusting. I opened the trust documents and flipped through the pages until I found what I was looking for. Beneficiaries. Conditions. Clauses that had seemed distant when they were first explained to me, but now sat in front of me with a different kind of weight. There were provisions for Daniel. For future grandchildren. Safeguards in case of mismanagement, in case of external claims, in case someone tried to move pieces around that were not meant to be moved. I set the papers down slowly and leaned back in my chair. Ashley had asked about all of this. Not directly. Not in a way that would have raised concern at the time. But enough. Enough to understand how things were structured. Enough to see where the lines were drawn. And now she had left Ethan here. With me. On this land. Under this roof. Not just physically. Legally. I picked up the guardianship letter again and read the date one more time. 3 days ago. That meant she had everything in place before she ever drove down that road. Before she stood on my porch. Before she handed me her son with that same calm expression she always wore when she thought she was in control. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope, then set both aside next to the trust documents. The room was quiet again, but it was no longer empty. It was full of intention. Full of decisions that had already been made. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the fields as the sun dipped lower, turning everything gold for a brief moment before the light faded. Ashley believed she had calculated this perfectly, that she had placed her son in the safest possible position, while she walked away from whatever she was facing. She believed I would accept it, manage it, keep things stable while she disappeared into whatever life she had chosen next. She was right about one thing. Ethan would be safe here. But she misunderstood something else entirely. Safety does not mean silence. And whatever she thought she left behind, she had not finished with it yet. The following morning I drove into town. I did not tell Ethan where I was going. I just told him I would be back before lunch and left him with a glass of milk and the television remote he did not turn on. The road into town was the same 15 miles it had always been, lined with fences, open fields, and the occasional mailbox leaning just slightly to one side. Familiar. Predictable. The kind of road that gives you time to think whether you want to or not. I parked outside First National Bank, the same place my husband and I had handled every account, every loan, every decision that kept this land running for decades. The building had not changed. Red brick. Glass doors. A flag out front that moved slowly in the morning breeze. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from people handling things that matter. I walked up to the counter and asked for Helen Carter. She had been there as long as I could remember. If anyone knew the details behind names and accounts tied to this family, it would be her. She recognized me the moment I stepped into her office. "Margaret," she said gently, standing up to shake my hand. "It has been a while." I nodded and took a seat across from her desk. "I need to review everything connected to my name," I said. My voice did not waver. It never does when I have already decided something. Helen did not ask unnecessary questions. She turned to her computer, her fingers moving across the keyboard with quiet efficiency. A few seconds passed. Then a few more. I watched her expression shift just slightly. Not alarm. Not confusion. Recognition. "There are several accounts here," she said carefully. "Some of them were updated recently." Recently. That word settled in the room like everything else had over the past 2 days. "Show me," I said. She printed out a series of documents and placed them in front of me, one by one. Checking accounts. Savings. Nothing unexpected at first. Then she paused, hesitating for just a moment before sliding another paper across the desk. "This one was added 3 days ago," she said. 3 days. The same day stamped on the guardianship letter. I looked down at the document. The account holder name was familiar. Ethan Collins. My grandson. The account balance was not small. Not something put together in a rush. It was substantial. Structured. Deliberate. I did not react immediately. I never do. "Who authorized this?" I asked. Helen adjusted her glasses and looked back at the screen. It was set up with documentation signed by Ashley Collins, she said. With you listed as the secondary authority. I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting that settle into place with everything else. Not just placed here physically, placed here financially, legally, protected. Are there any restrictions? I asked. Helen nodded. Yes. The account is tied to a trust structure. It cannot be accessed or transferred without your authorization. I let out a slow breath through my nose. Of course it could not. Ashley had not just left her son somewhere safe. She had placed him somewhere controlled. Somewhere that could not be easily undone. Is there anything else? I asked. Helen hesitated again, then pulled up another file. There was also a transfer request initiated, she said. Assets being moved. Under protective status. Completed. I asked. Pending final authorization, she replied. Yours. I looked down at the papers in front of me again, then back up at her. Everything was already in motion. Every step planned. Every piece aligned. Ashley had not disappeared in panic. She had executed something. Clean. Quiet. Calculated. Print everything, I said. Helen nodded without question. When she handed me the full stack of documents, I gathered them carefully, aligning the edges before placing them into my bag. Margaret, she said softly as I stood to leave. Is everything all right? I paused for a moment considering the question. Then I gave her a small, polite smile. Everything is exactly what it is supposed to be, I said. And that was true. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, the heat settling into the pavement and the open air around it. I walked back to my truck, placed the documents on the passenger seat, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Ashley had not just walked away. She had set something in place before she did. Something she believed would hold. Something she believed I would accept without question. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, the tires kicking up a thin trail of dust behind me. She had been very careful, very precise. But she had made one assumption she should not have. She assumed I would not look deeper than what she left on the surface. She was wrong. I did not go straight back inside when I returned to the farm. I left the truck parked just off the gravel path and sat there for a moment, the engine off, the heat slowly settling into the cab. The documents rested on the passenger seat beside me, neatly stacked, heavier now than when I first picked them up. Not because of the paper, because of what they meant. I had seen enough to understand the structure, but understanding is not the same as confirming, and I do not move forward on assumptions. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Thomas Reed, he said, calm, professional, unchanged. Thomas, it is Margaret Collins, I replied. There was a brief pause, then a shift in his tone. Recognition. Margaret. It has been a long time. It has, I said. I need you to review something for me. Today. He did not ask questions. That is why I called him. Come by the office, he said. I will make time. I ended the call and stepped out of the truck, gathering the documents before heading inside the house. Ethan was exactly where I left him, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of milk untouched. He looked up when I entered, not anxious, not impatient. Just waiting. Everything okay? I asked. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. I set my bag down and moved to the sink, washing my hands slowly, letting the routine ground the moment. We are going into town again, I said. Just for a little while. He did not question it. He simply stood ready. That was the third thing I noticed about him. He adapted quickly. Too quickly. The drive back into town was quieter this time. The sun was higher, the road more active, but inside the truck, everything remained still. Ethan looked out the window, watching the fields pass by without asking where we were going. When we arrived at Thomas Reed's office, I guided him inside and settled him into a chair in the waiting area with a book from the small table beside him. I will not be long, I said. He nodded again. Always nodding. Always accepting. Thomas greeted me at the door to his office, his expression measured but attentive. What do you have? He asked as we sat down. I placed the envelope and the bank documents in front of him without a word. He opened them carefully, reading through each page with the kind of focus that comes from years of understanding what most people overlook. I watched him, not his hands, not the papers, but his face. The small changes. The slight tightening around his eyes. The pause that lasted just a second longer than it should have. When he finished, he set the papers down and looked at me directly. "This was structured," he said. "Yes," I replied. He tapped the guardianship letter lightly. "This gives you legal authority. Temporary in wording, but without a defined endpoint. It functions as open control until challenged." "And the trust?" I asked. He nodded. "Integrated. The child is now tied to protected assets that cannot be accessed without your approval. Whoever set this up knew exactly how to lock it in place." I leaned back slightly, letting his words confirm what I had already begun to see. "Can it be reversed?" I asked. Thomas considered that for a moment. "Not easily," he said. "Not without her initiating it. And even then there would be scrutiny, legal review, questions she may not want to answer." I folded my hands in my lap, steady. "Good," I said. He studied me for a moment longer. "Margaret," he said carefully, "this is not someone walking away in a panic. This is someone relocating risk." I held his gaze. "I know." The room fell quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that settles when everything important has already been said. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. I looked down at the documents again, then back up at him. "I want everything secured," I said. "No access changes. No transfers without my approval. And I want to know if anything else has been moved that I have not seen yet." Thomas nodded once. "I will handle it." I stood, gathering the papers back into the envelope with the same care as before. As I reached the door, he spoke again. "Margaret," he said. I paused, turning slightly. "Be careful," he added. "People who plan like this do not leave things unfinished." I gave him a small nod. "Neither do I," I replied. When I stepped back into the waiting area, Ethan was still in the same chair, the book open in his lap, though I could tell he had not turned a single page. He looked up at me, calm as ever. "Ready?" I asked. He closed the book and stood. "Yes, ma'am." We walked out together, back into the afternoon light, back toward the truck, back toward the farm. And as I opened the door for him, I realized something had shifted again. Not in the situation, not in the facts, but in me. This was no longer about understanding what Ashley had done. It was about deciding what I would do next. The drive back felt shorter, even though the road had not changed. The same fences, the same fields, the same stretch of sky that never seemed to end. But something inside me had settled into place. Not calm, not comfort, control. When we pulled into the yard, the house stood exactly as it always had, quiet and steady, like it had been waiting for us to return. I stepped out first, then walked around to open the door for Ethan. He climbed down carefully, his shoes touching the dirt with a soft crunch, his eyes scanning the space like he was still learning where he fit within it. "Go wash your hands," I said. "Dinner will be ready soon." He nodded and went inside without hesitation. No questions. No delay. I watched him disappear through the doorway, then turned back toward the truck and reached for the envelope. This time I did not just carry it inside. I carried it with purpose. The kitchen felt warmer now, the late afternoon sun filling the room with a steady light that stretched across the table. I placed the envelope down, then moved to the stove, beginning the small routine of preparing a meal. Not because I was hungry, because routine keeps things grounded, keeps things clear. Ethan returned a few minutes later, sitting in the same chair as before, his posture straight, his hands folded neatly in front of him. I noticed he had already adjusted to the rhythm of the house. That told me more than anything he could have said. "We are going to make a few changes," I said, not looking directly at him as I stirred the pot. "Nothing complicated. Just structure." He nodded again. Always nodding. "Yes, ma'am." I set the food on the table and sat across from him. For a moment we ate in silence, the kind that does not feel empty, just measured. Then I placed my fork down and looked at him directly. "While you are here, you follow my rules," I said. My voice was calm, steady. "You wake up at 7. You help with small things around the house. You tell me if you need something. You do not keep things to yourself. Understood. He met my eyes for the first time since he arrived. Not defiant. Not afraid. Just attentive. Yes, ma'am, he said. I held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded once. Good. After dinner, I cleared the table and moved the envelope into the small office near the hallway. The room had not been used much in recent years, but everything inside it was still in place. Desk. Filing cabinet. The old lamp my husband used to read under late. At night, I sat down, opened the drawer, and began organizing the documents with a precision that matched the way they had been prepared. Guardianship. Financial records. Trust structures. Each piece placed where it belonged. Not hidden. Not ignored. Controlled. When I finished, I reached for my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to the bank. I confirmed that no changes would be processed without my direct approval. No exceptions. The second was to Thomas. I instructed him to flag any additional movements tied to the accounts we had reviewed. Quietly. Without drawing attention. He understood without needing further explanation. By the time I set the phone down, the house had gone still again. Night had settled in, the kind that wraps around a place like this without interruption. I stepped out onto the porch, the air cooler now, carrying the faint scent of the fields beyond. The road stretched out in front of me, empty as it had been since the moment Ashley left. No headlights. No return. I leaned lightly against the railing, my eyes tracing the line where the gravel met the dark. She believed distance would protect her, that once she crossed that horizon, whatever she left behind would stay contained. Managed. Silent. I let out a slow breath, steady and controlled. Behind me, inside the house, a light clicked off. Ethan moving through the space like he had already begun to belong to it. Not by choice. Not by chance. By design. I straightened slightly, my hands resting against the wood of the railing. The structure was in place now. The boundaries were clear. Everything she had set in motion had been secured. And that meant one thing. Whatever came next would not be on her terms anymore. The next morning, I did not wait for anything to happen. I created it. The sun had barely risen when I was already in the office. The documents spread across the desk in the same precise order I had arranged them the night before. Nothing had changed. That was the point. When things are set correctly, they do not shift unless someone forces them to. And if someone tries, you see it immediately. I reached for my phone and checked the notifications. One new message. Unknown number. No name attached. Just a short line that sat on the screen longer than it should have. Is he okay? No greeting. No explanation. No signature. I stared at it for a moment, then set the phone down without replying. Ashley had not disappeared completely. She had just moved herself out of reach while keeping a thread connected. Thin. Controlled. Enough to check, but not enough to be held accountable. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the fields as the light slowly filled the land. She wanted to know if he was okay. Not how he was feeling. Not what he needed. Just if he was okay. That told me everything I needed to know about where she stood. Behind me, I heard the soft sound of footsteps again. Ethan had woken early. Earlier than yesterday. Adjusting even faster now. Good morning, I said without turning around. Good morning, he replied. Same tone. Same calm. I turned and watched him for a moment. There was something different in the way he stood now. Not more relaxed. More aware. As if he could feel the shift even if he did not understand it. We have a few things to take care of today, I said. Nothing difficult. Just important. He nodded, stepping further into the room. Yes, ma'am. I picked up the phone again and typed a response. 3 words. He is safe. I did not add anything else. No questions. No invitation for conversation. I sent it, then placed the phone face down on the desk. If she wanted to reach back in, she would have to do more than that. Breakfast passed quietly, the routine settling in more firmly now. Eggs, toast, coffee, milk, the same as yesterday but more defined. Afterward, I handed Ethan a small list. Simple tasks. Feed the chickens. Check the water trough. Things that gave him a place here without overwhelming him. He took the paper, looked at it carefully, then folded it once and slipped it into his pocket. Not a word of complaint. Not a single question. Outside, the air was crisp, the kind that carried sound clearly across the property. I watched him move through the yard step by step, following the instructions with a focus that did not belong to a child who had just been left behind. He was not exploring. He was integrating. That was when my phone vibrated again. I did not reach for it immediately. I finished what I was doing first. Then I picked it up and looked at the screen. Another message. Same number. Thank you. 2 words. Nothing more. I read it once, then set the phone back down without responding. Gratitude without presence. Acknowledgement without responsibility. She was confirming something. Not asking. Not apologizing. Confirming. I walked back inside and into the office, closing the door behind me. The room felt smaller now, more focused. I sat down at the desk and pulled the documents closer again, scanning each page with a different perspective than before. Not just understanding what had been done, looking for what had not been finished. There is always something left incomplete when someone moves quickly, even if they believe they have planned everything. A signature placed too early. A transfer initiated but not finalized. A clause that opens a door they did not realize existed. I flipped through the pages slowly, methodically, until one detail caught my attention. Pending authorization. Not at the bank. Not in the trust. Somewhere else. A secondary layer. Smaller. Easier to overlook. I leaned back slightly, my fingers resting on the edge of the paper. There it was. Not a mistake. An opening. Ashley had secured the primary structure, locked it in place, but she had left one piece still waiting for completion, waiting for access, waiting for approval. Mine. I let out a slow breath, steady and controlled, then folded the document and placed it back into the stack. Outside, I could hear Ethan moving through the yard, the faint sound of water being poured, the soft rustle of feet hitting the ground. The farm continued as it always had. Quiet, steady, unchanged. But underneath that surface, everything had shifted. I picked up my phone one more time, opened a new message and typed a single line before stopping. I did not send it. Not yet. Timing matters. More than words. I placed the phone back down and stood, walking to the window again. The road stretched out in front of me, empty but no longer uncertain. Ashley had started this carefully, thoughtfully, quietly, but she had not finished it. And now she would have to come back to do that. Not because she wanted to, because she had no other choice. It happened just before sunset. Not with noise. Not with urgency. Just the low hum of tires on gravel, slow and deliberate, like whoever was driving knew exactly where they were going and did not need to rush to get there. I was already standing on the porch when the car came into view, the same long stretch of road, the same line of dust rising behind it, but this time it did not disappear. It stopped. The engine cut off and for a moment nothing moved. Then the driver's door opened. Ashley stepped out. She looked exactly the same. Composed. Put together. Not a strand of hair out of place. If anything, she looked more certain than she had the day she left. That told me everything I needed to know. This was not a return filled with doubt. This was a continuation of a plan. I did not move from where I stood. I did not wave. I did not call out. I simply watched as she walked toward the house, her steps measured, her expression unreadable from a distance but clear enough in intention. Behind me, I heard the faint sound of the screen door shift. Ethan had come to stand just inside the doorway. He did not step out. He just watched. I did not turn around. Stay inside, I said quietly. The door settled back into place. Ashley reached the bottom step of the porch and stopped, looking up at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt still, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with the heat of the day. "He is okay?" she asked. Not hello. Not an apology. Just that same question again, now spoken out loud. I nodded once. "He is safe." She let out a small breath, almost like relief, but not quite. More like confirmation. "Good," she said. "Then we should finish this." There it was. No hesitation. No attempt to soften it. Just a direct move to what she had come for. I stepped aside slightly, not as an invitation, but as a boundary. "We will talk out here," I said. She paused for a fraction of a second, then nodded and remained where she was. I assume you saw everything, she said. I did, I replied. She folded her arms lightly, her posture controlled. Then you understand why I had to do it this way. I held her gaze. I understand what you did, I said. Why is it different? Question. A flicker passed through her expression. Not anger. Not defensiveness. Calculation. There are things happening, she said carefully. Things that could affect him if he stayed with me. Legal things, I said. Financial things. She did not deny it. That was answer enough. So you moved the risk, I continued. You placed it here. With me. She nodded once. You are the safest option. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was kind, because it was accurate. And the pending authorization? I asked. That was when she shifted just slightly. The first real change in her posture since she arrived. I need that completed, she said. It secures everything fully. Of course it did. The final step. The piece she could not finish without me. And after that? I asked. She hesitated just for a moment. After that, everything stays protected, she said. Not answered. Redirected. I let the silence stretch between us, long enough for the truth to settle into it without being spoken. Then I stepped forward just one step, enough to close the distance slightly but not enough to invade it. You did not leave him, I said quietly. You handed him over. Her eyes met mine, steady, unflinching. Yes, she said. No apology. No explanation beyond that. Just confirmation. I nodded slowly, accepting the clarity of it. Then you need to understand something, I said. My voice did not rise. It did not harden. It remained exactly where it had been since the beginning. Calm. Controlled. Final. You do not get to decide how this ends anymore. For the first time, she did not respond immediately. The air shifted again, not in tension but in recognition. The balance had changed. She could feel it. I am not refusing, I continued. But I am not completing anything until I decide it is finished. She held my gaze for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Not agreement. Not defeat. Acknowledgement. Then I will wait, she said. Of course she would. She had no other choice. I stepped back, returning to my place on the porch, the distance between us restored. Behind me, inside the house, Ethan remained still, watching, listening, learning something he would not fully understand until much later. Ashley turned without another word, walking back toward her car, her steps just as measured as when she arrived. The engine started. The car turned. And once again it disappeared down the road. But this time it was different. She had not left something unfinished. She had left it in my hands. And I had already decided how it would be handled.